Did you know that there was a set of evil twins in London who were so powerful that they shook an entire nation? These are the Kray twins. Let's start at the beginning. In the 1950s, there were two young men by the names of Ronald and Reginald Kray. They were identical twin boys born to a working-class family in London. Their father was a career criminal, but their mother was actually a really good woman who worked as a seamstress. She had no idea that her sons were following in their father's footsteps. And even though she did everything she could to keep them out of trouble, she failed miserably. The boys were arrested for stealing cars at age 14. It was at this point she knew that she couldn't control them and sent them off to live with their grandmother instead. Now, once the boys moved in with their grandmother, their behavior became even worse. At night, they would sneak out of her house and commit crimes like armed robbery, burglary, theft, and assault. And it seemed that nothing could stop them. They were always one step ahead of the police. Now, some people say that it was because the boys were identical that they were able to fool everyone, but others say it was just because they were too smart for their own good. Either way, they got away with it for a long time. But eventually, the brothers were caught. They were tried for a crime spree that left 2 men dead. But the judge was so impressed with their fake tears that he decided to let them off easy. He sentenced them to 3 years probation, which was basically a slap on the wrist for what they had done. However, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise because the brothers used the attention they received from the media to build up their criminal empire. Now, if they kept doing what they were doing, they probably would have been arrested again. But now, the whole city knew their names, and soon they would use this fame to make millions. They built up their gang in the East End of London and began controlling all of the illegal activities in the area. This included protection rackets, gambling, and prostitution. They also dabbled in hijacking trucks and stealing luxury cars. You name it. These guys made money from it. The twins had big ambitions and wanted more than just being small-time crooks, so they started looking for ways to expand their business. This is when they met a man named Mad Pat. He was a dangerous gangster himself and had a lot of connections in the criminal underworld. The twins knew that if they could get on his good side, they would be able to take their gang to the next level. So they offered him a proposition. They would help him hijack trucks and steal luxury cars in exchange for a cut of the profits. Pat agreed, and soon the 3 of them were working together to carry out a number of successful heists. Now, while all of this was going on, the police were trying to figure out who was behind the recent surge in crime. They had a few suspects, but they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. That all changed when a police officer named Jack Shine was put on the case. He was a tough, no-nonsense cop who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and he was determined to bring the criminals to justice. Now, Shin started following the twins everywhere they went. He observed their every move and gathered evidence against them. Eventually, he had enough to make an arrest. On the day of the arrest, Shin and his team of officers surrounded the twins' house. They were prepared for a fight, but the twins came out with their hands up and surrendered peacefully. Once they were arrested, the police found a large amount of stolen goods at their house. They also found weapons and ammunition, which gave the police enough evidence to charge the twins with a number of serious offenses. During their trial, the twins tried to defend themselves, but it was clear that they were guilty. They were convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. Now, despite being locked up, the twins continued to run their criminal empire. They had loyal followers who were willing to do their bidding, and they were able to bribe the prison guards to look the other way. When Sheen learned about it, he was furious. He vowed to bring the twins down for good. He worked with the prison authorities to tighten security and prevent the twins from running their gang. He also recruited informants who infiltrated the gang and provided Sheen with valuable intelligence. Despite all of Sean's efforts, the twins were still able to pull off a few major heists, but it was only a matter of time before they were caught. Eventually, one of their fellow gangsters turned informant and testified against them. With the new evidence, Sean was able to arrest the twins and put an end to their reign of terror. Now, after spending several years in prison, the twins were released. They had lost their power and influence, and they were now just ordinary citizens. However, they never gave up their criminal ways. They continued to get into trouble with the law, and eventually they were arrested again. This time they were charged with a lesser offense, but it was clear that their criminal days were over. When the Kray twins were finally released from prison, they tried to start a new life. They got jobs and stayed out of trouble at least for a while, but eventually they were arrested again. This time it was for something small, like robbery or assault. But it was clear that the twins weren't done with crime yet. They might have lost their power and influence, but they still had their skills. And they weren't afraid to use them. After the release of the Kray twins, the British government took steps to ensure that they could not cause any more trouble. They were placed under close surveillance, and any suspicious activity was reported immediately. In addition, the police increased patrols in the areas where the twins lived and worked. They were also banned from owning firearms and other weapons. Now, despite all these restrictions, the twins were still able to cause problems. They were involved in a number of violent incidents and were suspected of being involved in several crimes. However, the police never had enough evidence to arrest them. As the years passed, the Kray twins faded into obscurity. They grew older, and their health began to deteriorate. They suffered from a number of illnesses, and eventually they were forced to slow down their criminal activities. But they never gave up completely. Even in their old age, they were still involved in a number of scams and schemes. In the end, the Kray twins were a cautionary tale of what can happen when criminals are allowed to operate unchecked. They were responsible for a number of crimes and caused a great deal of suffering to the people of London. However, they were also a product of their environment and the social conditions that allowed them to thrive. So, what do you think? Do you agree with me that they were a cautionary tale? Or do you think they were just evil? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you there.